Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is the fourth episode in our Product Essentials series, and today we're going to be talking all about Nintex K25, our on-premises low-code application development and process automation platform. My name is Holly Anderson. I'm the VP of Product Marketing here at Nintex, and today I'm joined by Eric Smith, our Senior Product Marketing Manager, and Andy Hayes, our Senior Solutions Architect. Now, just a really quick agenda before we dive into the content. I'm going to start and give just a brief overview of Nintex as a company, how K2 fits into all of our capabilities across our entire platform, and then I'll hand it over to Eric, who's going to provide a little bit more insight into Nintex K25 and the problems that we are solving for our customers with that platform. Then we'll turn it over to Andy, who's going to give a product demo, and we'll wrap things up today with a little bit of an introduction into one of our Nintex K25 customers, Ballast Needham. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, as I mentioned, I'm just going to give a really brief overview of Nintex, the company, for those of you who may not be familiar with us. So we started back in Australia in 2006, and at that time, we were really focused on providing workflow capabilities specifically for the SharePoint ecosystem. Now, things have changed a lot in the market, and we've grown and expanded our capabilities throughout those many different years. But one of the things that has remained the same since the very beginning for Nintex is really our mission. And that is all about transforming the way people work through process intelligence and process automation. And really, that's been our core focus from the very beginning, and what we're really looking at as we evolve and bring in new capabilities and new tool sets over time. Now, some of you may be familiar that K2 was acquired by Nintex about 18 or so months ago, and as part of that, we are now part of an entire platform of capabilities really focused on driving that process intelligence and process automation for our customers. As a matter of fact, we're serving more than 10,000 customers worldwide, really helping to solve all of their process needs across many, many different use cases. We also have a very large, extensive partner community that helps us implement projects for all of our customers worldwide. And really, when we really have a great open community that helps to solve all of our customers' challenges that they may have with process automation, but it's really a great way to connect with other folks in the industry who are interested in process and trying to solve those process needs for their organization. So we have a really vibrant, large community as well. Now, as I mentioned, Nintex K25 is just a piece of the entire Nintex portfolio of capabilities, and really we are focused on providing the most complete capabilities for wherever you are in your process journey. So we have capabilities all around discovering and mapping what processes you may have in your organization. And then we provide a wide variety of automation capabilities, everything from forms and mobile apps, workflow, which is something we're going to be talking about today, to our RPA capabilities, our document generation capabilities, as well as e-signature, which is another new acquisition that Nintex just recently did around Nintex AssureSign, which provides e-signature capabilities native to the platform, as well as being able to optimize your processes over time. So utilizing those analytics and metrics that we have as part of our platform to really help with that continuous improvement. So lots of great capabilities that we have in the Nintex suite today. But as I mentioned, we are going to be talking specifically about Nintex K25 today. So I'm going to go ahead and pass over to Eric, and he'll dive a little bit deeper into some of the specific problems that Nintex K25 solves. And as I mentioned, we'll hand over to Andy for a demo a little bit later. So Eric, I'll go ahead and pass over to you. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Holly. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our K25 Product Essentials session. Before we get started, I wanted to just touch on a topic that I'm sure we're all well aware of, and that's digital transformation. Digital transformation is not a new topic, and while companies are under extreme pressure to improve the efficiency in their business processes, most companies are still heavily reliant on manual processes, often using paper, email, and spreadsheets to accomplish them. There's a couple of trends that we hear from our customers about why they're struggling to digitally transform. First, they just lack the visibility into the core manual business processes that make up their entire business. And without understanding these processes, it's really difficult to automate them. Secondly, a lot of the automation technology that was historically available was targeted at really helping highly technical developers to be more productive. And given its reliance on coding, it only answered the needs of the most complex business processes. And today, you'll find that resources that you need within the business to build these complex automation solutions, they just tend to be non-existent. And lastly, one of the things that we hear a lot is we just don't have the right tools to build out our automation projects. Many of the tools that are available are too lightweight, and they lack the capability and the power necessary. So their usage is really relegated to automating only the most simplest of processes. And at Nintex, we just take a different approach to process management and automation. Traditionally, the discovery and the mapping of processes was challenging, with tools that caused processes to be difficult to find and just caused a lack of collaboration and standardization across the business. Traditional automation requires heavy coding and development resources, and often these restrict how quickly automation can be implemented. The time to value is slow, and the ROI was hard to measure, as traditional automation projects took years with costly consulting and a lot of rigidity, making them very difficult to scale. But at Nintex, our easy-to-use process platform, it engages teams to collaboratively map, manage, and improve their business processes. Nintex automation is agile. It's easy to use by each line of business, and it makes the processes easy to automate across all of your systems and across the entire business. Nintex automation projects can be implemented in days, and they're built for constant change. So Nintex is affordable, and it drives a low total cost of ownership. So let's jump into Nintex K25. Nintex K25 is our premier on-premise solution, providing a low-code process automation, and it's uniquely designed to really enable the rapid solution development through a powerful low-code designer that gives you reusable components and real-time integration with your line of business systems and applications. Nintex K25 can empower your IT and the business to scale process automation across the entire enterprise through a no-code solution that doesn't require a professional developer to spend weeks custom coding solutions. It enables control, compliance, and governance across all of your process applications and integrations to line of business systems through a centralized management and security capabilities. Lastly, Nintex K25 supports the needs of the business for sophisticated process automation through our best-in-class workflow engine and process capabilities. So rather than hear me talk about Nintex K25, I'm going to pass it over to Andy Hayes, who's going to take you through a demo. Take it away, Andy.
So what we're going to do now is actually go off and build an application from start to finish using K2. So the first thing that we typically want to do is sort out our data. And in this scenario, I've actually got a SQL database with a couple of tables that I want to use. Now, the first one is just like a simple expense type table, which has currently got nothing in it. And we will populate that with some data from K2 shortly. And I've also got a master record data as well. And that's where I'm going to load it up with some expenses from the K2 form. And we're also going to use that within the K2 workflow as well. So just for an example, the first thing I want to do is go back to my expense type table. I'm just going to add something in here so we can see that data coming back through within K2. So let's go off and edit the table, and let's just add in one value, and this can just be breakfast. Perfect. Now we know that we've got data within our SQL table. We can go off to K2 management, and that's where we can go off and actually build the integration and bring these tables into our K2 platform. So let's scroll back to our desktop, and I am currently now at the K2 management screen. So the first thing I want to do is go off and expand our integration option and click on service instances. And a service instances is essentially an instance of the service. And in this scenario, we're going to create an instance to that SQL database. Now, to create a brand new one, we need to go off and click on Add, and this will bring up a dialog for us to fill out some information. Now, we're going to keep this nice and simple. I'm going to go off and call this SQL, and the service type is going to be a SQL server. So if I scroll down the list here and find SQL, which is right here. After clicking on that option, the next values are going to change, and they're going to go off and reflect. They're going to reflect what needs to go in to make this integration happen. So for this example, I'm going to go off and click on our authentication mode. I'm going to change that to static, and the username is going to be my K2 admin. And now also need to add in a password as well. Cool. Then we scroll down, and the next thing we need to add is a server and the database itself. So if I scroll back to SQL Management Studio once again, I can quickly go off and just do a copy and paste on the server name and bring that in. And the database is going to be ATG. So let's go off and just add that to my list as well. Let's go off and click OK. And then this usually takes about 3 or 4 seconds, and now we've been notified that the service instance has been created, which means we've now built an integration between our K2 instance and that SQL database. Let's go off and click OK. Now, the next thing we want to do is go off and create some smart objects. So what I'm going to do now is go to my service instance itself and find SQL. If you can't find it in the list, you can also just search for it via the search bar, and this will bring back everything that you need. Now, I do not want to configure the service instance. What I actually want to do is go off and generate some smart objects. So, as you can see here, we've got a little view showing us what we can bring back. So in a SQL database, it's typically made up with stored procedures, which are custom. Your tables is where you store your information. And then you've got your views, which is also a custom way of presenting information back. And each of these items you can actually use within K2 as well. It's a very typical scenario for customers to build stored procedures and use them within your K2 forms and K2 workflow as well. But in this scenario, I want to go off to my tables and grab a couple of things here. So what I want to bring in is my prospect expenses, and this is going to be my master data. And I also want to bring in that expense type as well, which currently just has that breakfast item in there. So let's go off and click OK. And this usually takes a couple of seconds. Perfect. It's now been completed. So the next thing I want to do is, before I actually start using these smart objects, I want to go off and test to make sure they actually work and it brings back the correct data. And there's a kind of like a best practice guide that you should always do within your Nintex K2 applications. It's just to test your data first to make sure you're getting the expected results. Now, it's the same deal. We can scroll through this list here of all the smart objects that are within this environment, or I can go off and just search for my instance name or the smart object itself. Now, in this scenario, I have got, where is it? Expense type is right here, and the prospect expenses is right here. Now, if I go off and click on the expense type, we know there is one item in there. So what we can do here is go off and click on list, and when I click execute, we expect that breakfast is coming back, which it has. So we know that the read and the list is most likely working. Let's go off and just add a new value to this SQL database. So we've done breakfast. Let's go off and do lunch. Let's go off and click execute. It's returning an ID, a value of 8, which is expected behavior. So if I go back to my SQL database once again, and this time do another select on this, you can see both items have now come in, meaning we've got a read and write connection working, which is brilliant. Now, if you wanted to populate this list of a whole range of different items, You can do it from the SQL Management Studio if you like, but the easier and fastest way of doing it, in my opinion, is just to generate a view using K2 Designer. And the reason why I like this is because you can use that view over and over again, and you can also attach it to your applications, like in a admin or settings screen. So if we go off to our all items and you scroll down to SQL Server, and go to SQL, go to tables, and this time I'm going to click on the expense type and click on generate a view. And I want to make a view that we can edit, meaning we can read, list, and update and create as well. That's now been generated. It was super quick to do. And all I need to do now is go off and click on the runtime URL, and that will bring up the view for me, which will give me the ability to go off and actually add in those extra values. So let's go off and do dinner. Let's do some snacks. We can do a taxi, and we can do drinks as well. Let's go off and click save. That's now been completed. And if I go back to my SQL database once again and do an execute, you can see all those items have now come through as expected. Perfect. So we've got our SQL database. What we want to do now is go off and create a view. But the first thing we want to do is actually just create a view using some Salesforce information. So the whole idea of this expense claim form is that we're going to be submitting an expense for approval against a customer or a prospect who currently have an opportunity with us. So if I go back to my designer once again, let's go back to our K2 Designer main screen and go off and create a new category. I'm going to call this product essentials and call this expenses. And this category is just a folder where we can go off and store objects and views and so on. It's purely cosmetic. You can name them how you like, and you can move objects between folders. You're not going to break anything. So we've got that PE expenses folder. What I want to do is go back to my SQL Server here and just drag and drop these two items, into the PE expenses folder. So I know where they are, and people will know that these smart objects are tied to this application. Now I want to go off and create a brand new view. So let's right click on PE expenses and click on a new view, and I'm going to call this PE Salesforce Op Detail. And you can see here we've got two types of views. We've got an item view and we've got a list view. Because we're going to capture information, it's more suited to use an item view for this scenario. Then we've also got the option to add a data source, which we're going to do, and we want to bring in a Salesforce smart object. So scrolling through my context browser once again, let's go off and find Salesforce. And I've got an instance right here, and I want to bring in the opportunity and click OK. Because there's values within that Salesforce data source that I want to show on the view itself. So let's go off and click Create. And this will bring up our view designer. So this is where we can go off and we can drag and drop the controls that we want to use onto the canvas, and we can update the properties on the right-hand side as well. Or we can go directly to the fields of that data source as well, which is a lot easier to use. So because it's an opportunity in Salesforce, it needs to have an account. So I'm going to go off and just drag and drop the account ID onto the canvas. Now, as you can see here, it's brought down a drop-down. And the reason why it's done that is because K2, when you integrate with these systems like Oracle or SQL or Salesforce, and there's a relationship between the tables, K2 knows that and understands that, and it will automatically build that relationship for you. So you can see here we brought the account drop-down, and it's automatically mapped up to the account smart object. It's fantastic, and it really does help speed up that kind of development lifecycle, especially when you're building very large and complex forms. Now, as an example, let's just go off and click Finish and just view our view right now, and then we can work out what changes we need to make. So let's go off and click on the runtime URL, and this is going to go off and open up the view for us. But if I go off and click on the drop down, it's going to bring back all the accounts, and it's showing us the account ID, which is not very friendly because no one understands, where or who that account belongs to. So if we go back to our designer once again, we can quickly make a couple of changes to make that more user-friendly and to allow everyone to understand what account they're selecting. So by clicking on the drop-down, I'm going to go off and click on our data source, and under the display, I'm going to change this as something else. So rather than ID, I'm going to bring in the name and click OK and click Save. If we do a refresh quickly, you can see here all the names are now been brought in correctly, which is expected behavior. Also, I don't really like the drop down for when you're dealing with like tons and tons of information. It looks a little bit clunky in my opinion. So what I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to quickly swap the controls. So by clicking on the change control option, I can select a different control, and in this scenario, I want to use the autocomplete. Let's go off and click OK, and let's just try it out. Let's do a search, let's do a save, sorry, and do a search, and then you can see our autocomplete is now kept the same settings from the drop down, but it's all, with a click of a button, we've been able to change the control on the fly to make a better user experience. Now, let's go back to our designer once again and bring in some other stuff here. So we've got the opportunity smart object tied to this. We also want a name. Let's just drag and drop that onto the view. And then we also want to bring in things like the stage name because that's quite important information. Let's bring in the description. And what else could we bring in here? Let's bring in the amount, and let's bring in the close date as well. Now, the description is going to be quite large, so let's just change our cell and table around a little bit. I'm going to merge the cells right here, bring in the description, and let's change that control to, let's say, a rich text, which is fine. But we probably don't need the rich text because no one's going to make any modifications. So let's just change that control once again and make that a text area. And I can make that a little bit bigger. We can make that 5 rows, but you can change it to how big you want it to be. It doesn't really matter. Now, the stage name, the amount, and the close date, they don't need to be input because it's going to be read-only, and we're going to pre-populate that information from another control. So it's the same deal. We can click on the control itself, and we can change this to a data label. The data label is the Swiss Army knife control of K2 Smart Forms. It allows you to transfer data to that control. And if you wanted to, you can also go off and insert custom JavaScript, CSS, and HTML as well. Perfect. It's looking pretty good. So let's go off and click Save. And let's go back to our view once again. And we can see all the changes are now in there. But what I want to do is when a user selects an account, for example, Acme, I want to populate a drop down here with the opportunities tied to that account. So once again, it's all about making a seamless experience for that end user. So if we go back to our designer and click on name, I'm going to change this to a drop down. And I'm going to populate this drop down with the opportunity smart objects. So going back to our smart object list once again and going back to Salesforce, I'm going to grab the opportunity smart object and click OK. And the display, we don't want that ID, we want the name, and click OK. Now I want to filter this drop down with the account autocomplete. Now I can do it from here if we're doing a simple filter, But the kind of way I always recommend to do it is via a rule, because we've got more flexibility and we can add in things like sorting and advanced filtering as well. So by clicking OK, let's go off and create a brand new rule within the view. And this rule, the event, is going to be when a control on the view raises an event. So when something happens to that control, let's go off and do some stuff. So in this scenario, it's going to be the account autocomplete has been changed or updated. And the action is we're going to populate a list control, which is the drop down with some data. And that control is going to be the name. And let's go off and click configure. So from here, we want to go off and build our filter, and we can add some sorting in this as well. But like I mentioned before, you can also go off and build an advanced filter if you want to do as well, which a lot of our Nintex K2 customers do. Typically in those scenarios, we need to go off and build very long and complex forms. But in this scenario, we just need to go off and build quite a straightforward filter, which is going to be, we want to filter on the account ID. So the field here is going to be the account ID, and we want to filter on the account ID autocomplete ID. If we go off and click finish, click OK, and click save, and do a quick refresh here. Now, if we search for an account, let's go off and search something like Acme. You can see here it's populated with all the opportunities related to the account, and that's exactly what we wanted. But the other thing we want to do is go off, and when we select one of these opportunities, we want to populate these other controls with some information just to kind of give the end user, more visual information so they know what to do. Especially if they're going to approve or reject something. So back to our designer, let's go off, and this time I'm going to go off and create another rule. And the rule is going to be when a control, once again, on the view raises an event, and when the name drop-down has been changed, I want to transfer some data from that smart object tied to this drop-down and populate those other data labels. So in our context browser, if we go to our name dropdown, you can see that smart object and all the information is available. So we can go off and just drag and drop these controls into place. So for example, the amount, the close date, the description, and the stage name. I think that's all we need. So let's go off and click OK and click Save. Then we can go off and do a refresh and fill this out once again. Let's just choose something here. Perfect. And you can see here all these other items have now been populated with information. And when we change through it, it's going to update straight away. Awesome. We've now got ourselves a view that we can use. So let's go off and build a quick form within K2 as well. So let's go to our folder once again and do a new form. And I'm going to go off and call this PE expense. And let's go ahead and click create. Now, the first thing I want to do is bring in our new modern look and feel. So I'm going to untick the legacy theme. And what this modern UI gives you is not only a fantastic looking base layout, but it also gives you the ability to go off and build your own custom themes where you can build once and you can reuse over and over again. So in this form, let's go off and just do a couple of things here. I'm going to change the width to 80% because it looks a little bit better on my monitor. And I want to go off and grab that op detail that we've already got. Just going to drag and drop that onto the form like that. We can call this op expense detail. And let's go off to our common folder, which stores all our reusable objects and items. And in this scenario, I've got something called the common header, and I'm just going to drag and drop this onto the canvas like this. Perfect. I'm going to make sure the header's not collapsible, And let's go off and click save. And while we're at it, let's just do a runtime URL and work out what changes we need to make. Now, the big thing we need to do is add some buttons, as you can see here. So let's go to our designer once again and click edit. And this time I'm going to bring a table onto the form, and I'm going to give it 2 columns and 1 row. And let's just drag and drop some buttons from our toolbox onto the form, and just like that. We can also do alignment, so we can make sure everything's lined up correctly, which obviously looks way better as well. And let's change the text name to submit. And this one can be cancel. Cool. And let's change the style from normal to quiet, and this can be main. You can also do custom conditional formats and formatting on the button as well if you've got like a particular color scheme that you want to be aligned with. So let's click save, and actually before I do anything, let's go off and create a parameter so I can add an ID to it shortly. Let's go and click save and do a refresh, and our buttons are now on the form as expected. But what I really want to do is when I click on the submit button, I want to grab this data and store it within that SQL database. So let's go back to our designer and click on rules, and this time we're going to create another rule saying when a control on the form raises an event, and the control is going to be a submit button. Let's add some validation in here, making sure that all the controls are filled out before we go off and do something. So I'm going to make this all required. I think that makes sense. Let's just do the account ID and the name to be required. And click OK. Now, I forgot to mention, what's it called? We've got required and we've got validate. If you've got something like a name or an email address or a phone number, and there's a validation against that, we can stop someone from submitting a form if that validation hasn't been passed. And that's great, once again, when you've got 40 or 50 different controls. You don't have to build the rule on each control. You can do it from a centralized area. So let's go off and click OK, and let's just put a transfer data in here for now. And click OK. So the button now works. We're going to do some validation. If we click the button, for example, right now, there's nothing been filled. But we're missing some vital data here. So we're missing things like the name, the date, the value, and so on. So to get around this, we could add this to the same view. But that means the next person who reuses it might have information that they don't want. So in this scenario, we're going to create a brand new view. And it's super simple. So just go off to our prospect expenses smart object and go off and click design a new view. And we can call this expense details. It's going to be an item view once again. And this time, let's just go off and use our generate button. And we want name, date, expense type, amount, op name. We want close date. We want stage name. And let's put a comment in there as well. Perfect. If we wanted to, we can go off and we can add columns below, so we can move things around like the comments and stuff. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, and if you wanted to, you can go off and change these labels as well, just to look a little bit nicer. Expense type. Let's do a couple of these as an example. Now, the expense type, we don't want a free text, we want a drop down. So using our change control once again, we can go off and click on the drop down list, and we can go directly to our smart object that we've already created, and we can just populate that with that expense type information. And the display is going to be a name. Brilliant. Cool. Let's go finish, and let's just go back to our form once again and click edit. And this time we're going to bring in our brand new view, which is right here, and just drag and drop it onto the canvas just like that. Oops, I brought in the wrong one, so we can remove that. We want expense details. And let's just call this main expense detail and click save. Perfect. So if we go back to our form once again and do a refresh, all that information is now available for us to use, and that expense type drop down is bringing in all that information that we want, which is great. So if we go back to our designer once again, let's go click on that submit button and update this rule to reflect what we want to also bring in. So we've got the expense details right here, and I want the name, the date, the drop down, the amount needs to be populated. Cool. Now, as you may have noticed on the last screen, we're not populating information we've already got. Like, we're not pre-populating the form with today's date and my name, which is a best practice thing to do because you don't want your users having to refill out information that you've already got. So I'm going to quickly modify when the form is initializing, which means loading. I'm just going to transfer some data to the form. And we want to grab things like my current user, grab the display name and match that up along with the current date as well, just to make things a lot easier for the end user. Once again, it's all about making that beautiful and that nice flow for that user experience. If we do a refresh, you can see straight away my name and today's date has now been populated. So let's go off to our designer once again and modify when the submit is clicked. And this time we're going to execute a smart object method because we want to write data back to our smart object. And if we go back to our folder and click on prospect expenses, the method is going to be a crate. And this is all the information that we can add to that smart object. So things like the name we've already got as a control, so we can just drag and drop that onto the canvas just like that. We can do things like the expense type, and we could also do the amount as well. And then the account can come from the other view as well. So we've got the account ID, which can go right there, and the opportunity name, close date. What else we got here? Stage name. And we can keep it like this for now. Then the output is going to be an ID, and I'm going to pass that to the parameter. And what I also want to do is show a message to the user saying, hey, it has now been submitted. So we can call this expense claim ID. Let's grab the parameter right here. Has been submitted. Click OK. And then let's also execute a view method twice because we want to clear all that information. So if you want to fill out multiple expenses, you don't have to manually remove everything. So we want to get rid of the expense details and the Salesforce op detail, and the method is going to be clear. And click OK. Let's do a save and let's do a refresh. So let's go off and fill the form out. So the account is going to be Acme once again, which is this one right here. And let's choose one of these opportunities. You can see here it's brought in the dollar value, the close date, the stage name, and so on. Let's go off and choose the expense type. And I took Acme out for some dinner, and it costed us $500. And we had a steak dinner. And let's go off and click submit. Perfect. We've just been given that the expense claim ID number 2 has been submitted. And when I click OK, it's going to clear out all the information on the form as well. If I go back to my SQL Server once again, and this time if we do a quick refresh and go directly to our table and do a select, you can see all that information has now been populated to that SQL table. Now, for the last part of this Product Essentials, I just want to quickly go over the workflow. So it's the same concept. Let's go back to our folder once again and click on New Workflow. And let's go off and give this workflow a name, and we can call this PE Expenses, and click Create. Now, the whole idea of the workflow is that you want to use that data that we've already got stored, and you want to go off and assign tasks to different users, different groups, or different roles using that data. So the first thing we want to do by going on our left-hand side here is build something called a reference. And what the reference does and allows you to do is to snapshot data that you can use within the workflow. So the smart object is going to be the one that we just added data to, which is going to be under P expenses. Click OK. It's going to be a list method, and the input is going to be the ID. Which means now we have a snapshot of the live data. Now, if that data does change, we always pull out the latest data as well, so you don't have to worry about old, stale data. But what that means is if you want to go off and use that data in a workflow action, you can. So for example, if you want to go off and send an email, you can populate the body with that information and add custom content as well. Also, if you want to go off and build like a rule and you want to use that data, you can. So for example, here I've just added a split rule, and what I'm going to say is there's two possible outcomes. One's going to be approved, or one needs manager approval. The logic is if the value, or the amount, sorry, is greater than or equal to 500, then we need manager approval. Or if it's under 500, let's make it 100 actually. If it's under 100, we can automatically approve this. And if we do need to go off and assign a task to a manager, we can just drag and drop the task onto the canvas, and then we can go off and update the configuration. For example, here we can choose the actions, we can choose what form we want to use. And another big thing about K2 and its reusability is that we can just go off and reuse that form that we've already created. You don't have to go off and build a brand new form. We can choose who the task goes to. It could be the originator, it could be the manager's originator, or we can go off and use an Active Directory group or a K2 role as well. And then we can configure a whole range of different elements within the task. Now, I know that was a very high-level overview of what the K2 workflow is all about, and there is a lot to cover. So if you found this session quite useful, be on the lookout for our next one, where I will cover the workflow in a lot more detail. So thank you very much for attending today's session.
Like any other construction project, on our projects there are a lot of different trades and a lot of people involved. So this means that there are a lot of risks in unsafe situations and coordinating quality. We chose for K2 for several reasons. What appealed most was the data first philosophy. We really think that data is going to give us the competitive advantage and make sure we get our quality and safety at an even higher level. It also gave us the confidence that K2 was able to provide us with a platform on which we could build an enterprise solution. K2 has actually had a very positive impact on Bolles-Niedam and its management. We see now that the data is coming in a structured way, ready for analysis. We can finally start becoming a learning organization and learn from the data and start doing trend analysis and find patterns. So for example, we can start looking for the unsafe situations that occur more often than others. And so we can adjust our processes and education of the employees to still create a safe working environment. Besides that, we also have the paper process eliminated, which means we save a lot of time. One very important feature is that this mobile app that we're using, it's built by Indox, called the K2 Business Apps. It supports offline functionality, so our workers in the field can go to sites where there's no internet or hard to reach. For example, under the water in the tunnel or somewhere in the field where in the middle of nowhere, and they can still work. K2 will help us in providing a better service to our customers because we lower the bar for our end users to to document proof, and also the whole chain from requirements all the way to as-built quality is now fully digitized and linked, so the whole traceability is much better than with the paper processes. Our experiences with K2 are nothing but positive. What I would recommend to others, of course, use K2 because it's a very good product. It's really powerful. So I would recommend that you have a look into the Inbox app.
All right, well, we've been doing our best to answer all of the questions in the chat throughout this webinar, but there are quite a bit more, and as we are getting close to time, we're going to follow up with you directly after this webinar. If there's any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is eric.smith@nintex.com. And again, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you at our next Product Essentials webinar. Have a great day. Bye.